Alright, in this video I'm going to be replacing the handlebar and stem that came on the GT Aggressor Pro with these race face handlebar and stem combo. Both of these are the race face ride. So that's the stem, and it's just a little bit shorter than the stem that comes on the bike. Nothing too dramatic, but it is slightly shorter. And then for the handlebar, pretty similar. It's got a slight rise to it, very similar to the one that comes on it, and the handlebar is just a little bit longer. I think it's a 710 or something like that. And of course that's in millimeters, and I ordered them both from Race Face Direct, but you can get them from other sites, and I'll put some links in the description. And at some point we'll do a video for my kid and we'll post the link in the description. Now the only issue I had getting the brakes, shifters, and grips off this thing is that the plug for the grip on this side was, it broke getting it out of there. It was really jammed in there. I ended up having to use some needle nose pliers to rip it out, but I was able to go to a local bike store and just grab some new plugs, no problem. So pretty simple, just loosen up the grips, loosen up the brakes, loosen up the shifter, and then pull everything off. And obviously I got most of the video in fast motion. So you can see how easy that plug was to pull off the handlebar. It came off no problem whatsoever. And just like the other side, pull off the grip, the brake, and then remove the shifter from the old bar and stem. Try not to get them mixed up. If you don't know which is which, keep them on the same side of the bike. And then I am using a torque wrench to loosen things. You shouldn't do that, but I like to live dangerously. So there's 4 bolts that are on the front of the stem, and that's holding the handlebar onto the stem. You don't necessarily need to take that off, but I'm going to separate everything so I could weigh everything out separately and then weigh them together as well and give a good comparison, the new item versus the old item. And I'm just going to throw the bolts back into the stem because obviously I don't want to lose them if I ever reuse this stem for some other purpose. To remove the stem, there's a bolt on each side of the stem, and then there's one on the top. And all 3 of those bolts need to be, the 2 bolts on the side need to be loosened, and the bolt on the top needs to be removed completely. The bolt on the top is what tightens up the fork and the headset and brings everything together. So you're going to want to make sure that that goes on properly as well, but there it is, comes off no problem. As far as weights go, the original stem is weighing in at 156 grams. That's the one that came on the GT. And the race face stem weighs in at 134 grams. The old handlebar that came on the GT is going to weigh in pretty heavy at 418 grams. Maybe 19. And then the race face handlebar is still a little bit heavy. It's not a carbon bar or anything like that. 355 grams. So the combined weight difference, GT originally 575 grams for everything, and then for the new race face ride products 490. So saving about 85 grams, get a shorter stem, slightly wider handlebar. First thing I gotta do is put the race face stem on there, and I'm going to tighten up the bolts for the stem just by hand. I'm not going to break out the torque wrench, and for pretty much every bolt on here I'm using 6 Newton meters of force on the torque wrench. The torque wrench I have is actually not a metric torque wrench, so it's like 6.2 or something. It's slightly off. I don't have it graduated that way. And just like the stem being mounted loosely to the fork, I'm going to loosely mount the handlebar onto the stem as well. So I am tightening the bolts down a little bit, but again, I'm not going to break out the torque wrench just yet to tighten everything down. And when you're tightening the stem to the handlebar, you just want to bring every bolt down slowly. A little bit later in the video I'll show you the gap that you're supposed to keep an eye on so that you don't over tighten either the top or the bottom 2 bolts. and just want to bring all 4 bolts down sort of evenly. Very similar to putting a tire on a car. You just don't tighten the top bolt and then come across and tighten the bottom bolts. So I'm also sliding the handlebar inward, and then I'm putting the shifter and brake and grip on the handlebar, and then I'm going to push the handlebar in the other direction. Like I said, it is a little bit wider, so the brake, the shifter are actually pretty tight with the cabling. And that's another good reason not to tighten it down fully. So with the shifter on, put the grip and brake lever on, sort of how they were, and I'm just roughly lining them up to where I want them to be. Now I'm going to look at the rise of the handlebar, and there's actually some crosshairs on the handlebar to help you line it up and make sure that it's even. So the first one I'm going to tighten down is the handlebar. Like I said, I'm just getting the angle correct for where I would want it positioned on the bike. I'm just going in a cross pattern, tightening the bolts slightly, one at a time, just by hand. So you can see there's a gap on the top and on the bottom, and you want those gaps to be about equal. So like I said, don't just tighten the 2 top bolts all the way in, because you'll have a big gap on the bottom and no gap up top. And then just like when I was doing it by hand to make sure it was going down evenly, I'm going to do a cross pattern with the torque wrench and slowly bring it to 6 Newton meters on each one of the bolts. This is not a metric torque wrench, so it's slightly off 6, but that's fine. It'll be just fine. And once the handlebars tightened, I'm going to now do the stem. Get the GT logo positioned correctly. And the first bolt I'm going to bring down to torque is the one on the top, and that's to pull the stem, the fork, the headset tightly together. And then I'm going to do the 2 on the side, obviously making sure that the handlebar and the stem are lined up with the front wheels so that when you're riding, your front wheel's not straight and your handlebars are off to the side. And again, for all these bolts, I'm going to about 6 Newton meters for each of them. Now it's time to tighten up the shifters, the brakes, and the grips. So obviously I'm going to get the brakes at the angle that I want them to be held when riding the bike. It's not my bike, it's my kid's bike, but either way, I've been putting them where I would want them, and it seems to be also what he wants. For all of these, again, I'm going to about 6 Newton meters. So I'm doing the bolt on the lock-on grip first, then I'm doing the brakes, then I'm doing the shifters, although the order doesn't really matter that much. And it's the same on both sides, so if you got it done successfully on the left side, you should be able to do it on the right side. Anyway, I think the new setup looks great. Saved nearly 100 grams, and this handlebar and stem are actually not that expensive, but I think they look pretty slick. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.